Us. The participant count is leveling out, so we'll get started. My name is Renee Shapiro, and I am the Outreach Coordinator at the Northwest Avalanche Center. I get the privilege of organizing our avalanche awareness classes, which is what we are here for tonight. It's a 90-minute introduction to the basics of avalanche safety, and this introduction will really give folks a good idea of how to get started with winter recreation and ways to learn more to get more education. A few Zoom logistics. We all just tried out the chat functionality. That's a great resource. Just make sure you're selected all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your answers. And Robin may prompt you throughout the presentation to use the chat, and feel free to do that. There's also the Q&A. For any content-based questions related to the presentation this evening, please try to use the Q&A function, and I will hop in and help moderate some of those questions to Robin throughout the presentation. As a note, this is a webinar, so you are all muted and no one's video is on except Eudore, Robin, and I. And we are recording this presentation. The recording will be made available on the NWAC YouTube channel, and I can also share it with you all after this presentation. Tonight, we have the wonderful privilege of having Eudore here with us to do an American Sign Language interpretation of this awareness class. You also see that there is a live transcription at the bottom. We know this isn't 100% accurate, but we hope it will be a helpful resource for everyone tuning in this evening. And with that, I will pass the presentation off to Robin, our instructor for this evening. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
Thanks, Renee. Okay, everybody, give me a minute to get the PowerPoint up and running. This pandemic has definitely revealed my lack of technical savvy. So most of you probably have a little bit more Zoom experience at this point. Good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to your Avalanche Awareness course. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm really excited to have Eudore here interpreting as well. Let's start off with a little bit about me before I learn a little bit about you all. My name is Robin. I am a full-time ski patroller and avalanche forecaster at Crystal Mountain Ski Resort. In the summertime, I am a mountain guide for Alpine Ascents International. I work on mountains like Rainier, Denali. I go to the Himalayas. I go to the parts of India a couple times a year. And I also teach AIARE avalanche education classes, and I'm a professional observer for NWAC. So long story short, I spend a lot of my time thinking about avalanches and getting to play in the snow. And definitely one of my favorite parts of the job is the education component. I love getting to share information about how to be outside and be outside safely with folks like you all. A little bit about the Northwest Avalanche Center, our hosts tonight. They are a partnership between the Forest Service and a nonprofit branch of the organization. They provide our up-to-date avalanche and weather forecasts every day of the year, several times a day during the winter. And they run a bunch of education and outreach events and community events. They're a really great resource. So if you are not already a member of the Northwest Avalanche Center, please do consider becoming one. They are the ones that basically organize events like this and help get the forecast out there and available to you all. Let's start off by getting on the same page. We're going to use a lot of different terms tonight, so I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing with some avalanche basics. First of all, what is the backcountry? When we're talking about avalanche hazard and we're talking about an avalanche forecast, we're usually referring to traveling in the backcountry. And the backcountry is anywhere outside of a zone where there is active control work that takes place to reduce the risk for you. So anywhere outside of a ski area, a snow area, or a highway. Once you go past the gates in this photo, you are in an untouched snowpack that hasn't had active control work done to it for you. Next, avalanche basic. What is an avalanche? Take 30 seconds. Maybe you can drop a few ideas in the chat. When you think about an avalanche, what are you picturing in your head? So most of you probably identified that an avalanche is something along the lines of a bunch of snow, and that snow is sliding down a hill. I always make the joke, it never lands that well, but who here is worried about avalanches in Kansas? Nobody raises their hand, because Kansas is flat, right? So you need to have a lot of snow, and that snow needs to be in motion going down a hill. And those avalanches can be large, like in this top photo, or they can be quite small, like in the bottom photo. But when they start to impact us, whether they're large or small, they can definitely affect our risk and our experience in the mountains. 90% of avalanche accidents are triggered by either the person who is in the avalanche or the people in that person's party. So what does this mean? This could be interpreted as kind of a scary statistic, right? It means that we are the problem. We are the ones that are causing our own avalanches. But you can also choose to look at it in a positive way, which is we have some control here. Our decisions make a difference, and we can choose to put ourselves in higher risk, or we can choose to make decisions that reduce that risk and reduce the chances of us being involved in an avalanche. The final avalanche basic that I want to cover with all of us is the 3 ingredients to our avalanche sandwich or avalanche milkshake that we're going to need in order to have an avalanche. Those 3 things are unstable snow, avalanche terrain, and a trigger. A lot of times you'll see these put together in an avalanche triangle. You have 3 legs to make a triangle. You need these 3 things to have an avalanche. So on our avalanche triangle, we have all 3 of these components. If you're missing any one component, you're not going to have an avalanche. And we're going to investigate all 3 of these components a little bit more this evening. But first, I want to talk a little bit about avalanche centers. Avalanche centers, like the Northwest Avalanche Center, give us information about all 3 of these legs. They give us more information about unstable snow, avalanche terrain, and triggers. If you're unsure what Avalanche Center forecasts for the area that you are in, you can always go to avalanche.org, the photo up here in this top corner, and it has a great map resource where you can select the mountains that you're traveling to. Maybe you're taking a trip to Colorado, and you can select the area that you're going to and get the forecast for that zone. The tools that the Avalanche Centers give us are going to be called the danger rating and the bottom line. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those tools specifically in our own avalanche forecast zone on the Northwest Avalanche Center website. So let's change my screen here. This is today's forecast on the Northwest Avalanche Center. And you can see here in this map, there are different colored tiles for zones all across the Cascades. So on any given day, you could identify, you know what, I'm going to Paradise or I'm going to Crystal. That's down here in this west-south zone. I'm going to click on that tile and learn more about the avalanche conditions on any given day. And this website will pull up a page that has a bunch of different resources on it. Tonight, we're going to focus on this top resource. We're going to focus on the little colored tile here and the information that that gives us. And we're also going to focus on the bottom line. That's basically your elevator pitch. That's going to be the 3-sentence summary of what's going on out there in the wild world of avalanches. There are a bunch of other resources on this page. If you scroll further down, it dives deeper into the different elevation bands where you might find different levels of risk, different types of avalanches you might find in the backcountry, and even a specific weather forecast for the zone down here at the very bottom. Super useful tools, but tonight we're just going to focus on this top component. This forecast is issued by 6 p.m. every night during the winter season. The weather is updated twice a day, once in the morning and then once in the afternoon. So let's dive back into my PowerPoint here. So if the avalanche centers give us information about avalanche terrain, unstable snow, and triggers, first let's talk about unstable snow and how we can use information from the avalanche forecast to figure out whether or not there's unstable snow out there on any given day. How do we know if there's unstable snow? If you took an avalanche awareness class maybe 10 years ago, or maybe you took a level 1 10 years ago, you might have heard a lot of information about digging into the snow, how we have to go out and dig snow pits to find information and get data and figure out if the snow is stable or unstable. And you can definitely do that, but it's actually really hard to apply that information to your travel. And let's be real, if you have 2 days off a week, do you want to spend all of that time digging holes in the snow, or do you want to spend that time skiing and riding or going on a really cool snowshoe tour? Probably you want to spend your time doing your favorite activity rather than digging in the snow. So instead of just digging holes in the snow, we're going to rely on the experts' forecast, the experts who go out there and dig those pits for us to figure out where there is or isn't unstable snow on any given day. And when I say unstable snow, we should talk about the fact that snow is not one big block. There are different layers within the snowpack. And this is probably pretty intuitive to you if you spent much time outside. The video clip that I just played shows different layers forming in the snow. Every time the snow falls out of the sky, sometimes it's warmer, sometimes it's colder, sometimes there's wind. This creates a layered snowpack. Some of those layers stick together well, and some of them stick together less well. And when we have layers that don't stick together well, we have unstable snow, and that's when we start to see avalanches. To figure out if there's unstable snow out there, we can use the forecasted danger rating. We can use that bottom line observation, or that bottom line elevator pitch that I was telling you about. And we can use a tool called red flags. We'll get into each of these individually. We'll start with the danger rating. The danger rating is based on the North American Public Avalanche Danger Scale. Bit of a mouthful. This is a standardized way that we can talk about how risky we think it is in the backcountry on any given day, or how likely we think it is that you will trigger an avalanche when traveling in the backcountry on any given day. You can look at this colored tile photo and see that the scale ranges from low, down at the bottom, all the way up to extreme. Low does not mean no avalanches. Extreme means pretty darn likely to see an avalanche. And if you look at the side of this graphic, you'll see columns that says travel advice. This gives us really good information on what to actually do with the colored tile, right? It's one thing to see a colored tile that says yellow, moderate, or red, high. The travel advice will give you information about how to apply that when you're traveling in the backcountry. So let's pull up a couple of these and we can pick out the parts that talk about unstable snow. Oop, technical glitch there. Sorry, folks, my PowerPoint is just giving me problems. Great, back on track. So first I pulled up the definition for low hazard, and you'll notice that in this top line it says generally safe avalanche conditions. What that tells me is that the experts think that the snow is generally stable. Not that it's stable everywhere, but that in most places, most of the time on that day, it's going to be stable. Alternatively, I can pull up the definition for considerable, and I highlighted this section that says dangerous avalanche conditions exist. What that means is that experts think that on that day, you're going to find unstable snow in many places in the terrain. In addition to using the hazard rating, we can also use the bottom line observations. And the bottom line, again, it's that elevator pitch that's a 3-sentence summary of what the experts think is happening on any given day. The bottom line is going to contain a lot of different information that we might use, but some of it's going to be about snowpack. So here on this particular bottom line, I highlighted in yellow the last line that says, use large clues such as cornices and drifts to help you identify and avoid locations where the wind has deposited snow. What that's telling me is that experts think that there's specific areas where there is unstable snow, and it's given me some tools so I can identify where those areas are. On this particular day, they're worried about deep patches of snow transported by the wind, and they're also worried about cornices or features that the wind has built out along ridgelines that look like this photo. Finally, in addition to using the forecast that's provided to us by the experts, we can also use our own brains and our own observation skills when we're traveling in the backcountry to see if conditions line up with what's forecasted. We can use some pretty simple tools called red flags to identify when there are conditions that would promote rapid instability, rapid formation of an avalanche problem. And these red flags are evidence of recent avalanches, cracking or womping, big changes in temperature, and big changes in precipitation. I'll talk about each of these individually. Evidence of recent avalanches is pretty straightforward. Basically, the best indicator for there being unstable snow is seeing a recent avalanche. If there has to be unstable snow to have an avalanche, then if you have an avalanche, you definitely had unstable snow. So recent avalanches, ones that have happened in the last 24 to 48 hours, are a great indicator that the area that you're in probably has some unstable snow. The next red flag is cracking or womping. Cracking is when you're walking across a slope and you see a crack shoot from your ski tips, maybe all the way across the little slope that you're on or the feature that you're on. And womping is a technical term, believe it or not. It refers to a collapse in a weak layer in the snow, and it comes with an audible sound and also kind of a visceral feeling. You can sometimes feel the snow drop down a couple millimeters underneath you. It's that same feeling of like the elevator sinking underneath you. The next red flag is big changes in terms of sun or warming. This can create specific avalanche problems that are located in areas that are most affected by the sun, or in all terrain when you have rapid increases in the temperature, when it's been cold for many days and then all of a sudden it warms up. And finally, we have big changes in terms of the rapid addition of snow or rain. And this isn't just a little bit of snow, a couple inches of snow. We're talking about like lots and lots of snow, so much snow that it's hard to break trails, so much snow that you look at your snowshoe tracks and you can't see them anymore because they were gone. You know, they were there an hour ago and now they're under snow. So we can use these red flags to augment the forecast. They don't replace the forecast, but they can let us know if conditions are changing really rapidly when we're in the backcountry, and we need to adjust our travel plan accordingly. So as a sample, I pulled up today's bottom line and highlighted a couple different phrases in here that are referring specifically to unstable snow and where we might find it for tomorrow. The bottom line says another round of snow and wind will continue to stress the snowpack. So they're pointing out some of those red flags, those weather factors that are going to impact the snow tomorrow and make it unstable. The last line here says, with so much snow, any avalanche is capable of growing large enough to be fatal. So again, going back to that, lots of snow making the snowpack unstable tomorrow. So in summary, to kind of wrap up this section on unstable snow, it's hard to know if there's unstable snow out there at any given time. So because of that, we should use tools provided to us by the experts in the form of the danger rating and the bottom line. Those are going to be found in the avalanche forecast issued every day at 6 p.m. In addition to the avalanche forecast, we can use red flags to augment our understanding of the forecast and to locate specific instances of unstable snow when we're traveling in the backcountry. I'm going to take a pause now. Unstable snow is kind of a big topic, and ask for any questions.
Hi, Robin. Yeah, we do have a few questions in the chat. Conrad is wondering if the avalanche ratings are the same across and between states and Canada.
Yes, they are. That's a great question. It is standardized for the entire North American area. So you will find the same hazard ratings both between states and if you take a trip up into Canada.
Awesome. Elizabeth is wondering about wind loading. And if you want to maybe defer that question to later in the presentation, but she wants a little more info on wind.
No, absolutely. I can talk about wind loading. Rapid wind loading is sometimes considered a red flag. It's when the wind moves a lot of snow around and piles it up on one slope as opposed to the other. Anytime that you see that either in the mountains, you can see it in plumes of wind being transported off of one ridgeline and dropped on another. Or if you see verbiage in the forecast, if they're talking about things like wind drifts and stiffened wind transported snow and cornice formation, that's a good indicator that where that wind transported the snow, you probably have an avalanche problem.
Awesome, thank you. Asher is wondering, this is a great question related to recent avalanches. How do you know if the avalanche debris you see happened in the past 24 to 48 hours?
That is a good question. It really depends on the weather. So if you have avalanche debris that is under a dusting of snow, and you know that it snowed last night, right? You can pretty much say that it didn't come from the last couple hours. It came from at least a day ago. If it hasn't snowed for a couple days and you're trying to figure out if this debris is old or new, old debris starts to get kind of an old look. I know that's not very descriptive, but you think about like a fresh new like snowball that you just made, and then you let it sit out in the elements outside of your house, and it starts to get a little droopy and a little gloppy looking. Avalanche debris will look the same. It won't look crisp or fresh anymore. It might have a dusting of snow, and all of the bits and pieces might start to melt into one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we have a question just to re-emphasize identifying womphing for deaf people. So if folks can't hear that sound, can we describe one more way that the deaf community might be able to identify womph?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I would say that I've only heard the womphing about half the time that I've experienced it. Most frequently, I feel it in the pit of my stomach. Again, it kind of feels like that, you know, the trapdoor just opened underneath you, like weird butterflies in your stomach. I've also occasionally seen snow get shaken off of trees from womphing. That's pretty rare, but it does happen.
Thanks so much, Robin. Let's hop back into the presentation and we'll have time for some more questions later on.
Great. So back to our trusty avalanche triangle. We've talked about unstable snow. Now let's talk a little bit about avalanche terrain. Avalanche terrain is anywhere that avalanches live in the mountains. And the key word there is mountains, right? You need some sort of hill. You need specifically a steep hill in order to have an avalanche. And when we talk about avalanche terrain, we like to think about where avalanches start, run, and stop. And the stop component of avalanche terrain is really important because frequently we think, oh yeah, avalanches are in steep terrain, I'll just stay out of steep terrain. But the avalanche debris has to stop somewhere, and usually it's down in the flats or the meadows. So when we're talking about avalanche terrain, we want to really hone in on not only where terrain is steep, but also where once that avalanche starts, it would transport the debris. So let's talk a little bit more about the start zone, or where avalanches would start. Again, this tends to be steep terrain, about 30 to 45 degrees. And if you're not used to thinking about avalanche or terrain in general in terms of degrees, it might be helpful to think about it in terms of a ski resort. So avalanche terrain in general is going to be black diamond or double black diamonds terrain. If it's lower angle than that, if it looks more like a green circle or blue square terrain, then it's probably not steep enough to be avalanche terrain. Additionally, avalanche start zones are generally going to be rather open. They're going to not have that many trees, or the trees are going to be pretty sparse. So if you look at this photo, you can take a second and point out where you think an avalanche might start in this terrain. And it's pretty easy to do. It's clear cut that up near that ridgeline where there's not that many trees, it's open and it's clearly steep. We would expect that to be avalanche terrain. More difficult to suss out is the terrain where avalanches will run and ultimately stop. The best way to figure this out is to look at the terrain around you when you're out snowshoeing or you're out on your tour. Look for areas where there's steep and open terrain above you, where you're connected to that start zone, and look at the vegetation that you're surrounded by. If you're in an area that seems to lack vegetation, where it's all kind of short and mowed down, or the trees look like they've been in a boxing match, that's a great indication that avalanches run through that terrain frequently. If the tree looks like it's been in a boxing match, it probably has, and it was with an avalanche. So we're going to go back to our trusty avalanche danger rating scale to talk about how we connect the avalanche forecast to avalanche terrain. I've pulled up two different danger ratings for different days here. The top one, a high danger rating, gives us information about where we may or may not want to travel. And I highlighted in yellow this last line where it says travel in avalanche terrain not recommended. So on a high avalanche hazard day, there's so much unstable snow out there that the general recommendation is to just avoid avalanche terrain altogether. You can compare that with a moderate hazard day down here at the bottom, And I highlighted in yellow the last line where it says identify features of concern. So on a moderate hazard day, maybe we're staying out of those steep upper zones, but maybe we're less worried about being in the runout or the area beneath the avalanche terrain. The less unstable snow that we have, or the more specific that it is in the terrain, the more that we can travel in a variety of spaces in the mountains. In addition to the avalanche danger rating scale, we can also use the bottom line to help us identify what terrain we may or may not want to be in on any given day. This top bottom line that I pulled up, I highlighted the section that says use caution on slopes steeper than 35 degrees. That's a really good clue that the forecaster is telling us on that day, hey, maybe don't spend time in the super steep areas, but maybe you can travel in the less steep areas. You can compare that with the bottom line on the bottom here, where it says stay away from anywhere where avalanches can start, run, or stop. That's a pretty clear-cut sign that on that day, the avalanche forecaster thinks that you shouldn't spend any time in any part of avalanche terrain, regardless of whether you're in the steep part or the less steep part. One final component of avalanche terrain that I want to talk about is the idea of terrain traps. Getting caught in an avalanche is bad news. Getting caught in an avalanche that then pushes you over cliffs or into a creek or into a crevasse on a glacier is even worse. So an avalanche terrain trap, a terrain trap is anything that makes the consequences of that avalanche worse, anything that makes it more serious. Take a second and look at this photo on the screen in front of you and identify a couple areas that you would really not want to get caught in an avalanche in. Nobody wants to get caught in an avalanche, but anywhere that would be really bad. A couple areas that stood out to me were over in this corner where I see kind of dense trees and rocks, something that would increase the chance of my getting hurt if I were caught in an avalanche in that area. Up near the top, I see steep cliffs. If you were caught in an avalanche above the cliffs, you might get pushed over the cliffs. Down in the bottom, there's this gully, this concavity, kind of a dish in the terrain. You can imagine how if snow slid there, it wouldn't take very much snow to bury you quite deeply based on the shape of the terrain. And finally, down in this bottom corner, it's kind of hard to see, but there's an open creek or lake down there. There would be nothing worse than being caught in an avalanche and being pushed in a creek. That would just be a very bad situation. So when there are terrain traps, I want to be even more conservative and cautious with my decision-making, because even a small avalanche can have a really big impact on my safety and my group's safety. Again, going back to today's bottom line, so kind of tying this into today's forecast of what the forecaster thinks is going to happen tomorrow, I wanted to highlight this section that talks about terrain. Avoid slopes over 35 degrees, convexities, or wind-loaded terrain where triggering an avalanche is more likely. So for tomorrow, the forecaster has identified that traveling in steeper start zones, any areas that kind of break over or are shaped like a C, and wind-loaded pockets where the wind has loaded snow up and made it really deep, are going to be where we're most likely to find an avalanche, and so might be terrain that we want to avoid. Kind of wrap this section up, avalanche terrain is anywhere where an avalanche can start, run, or stop. And for our decision-making purposes, that includes both the steep area, but also the area immediately beneath the steep area where debris would run towards. In order to figure out what avalanche terrain we want to be in, or if we want to be in avalanche terrain at all, we can use the danger rating and we can use the bottom line. And finally, you have to be obsessed with consequences when you're traveling in the backcountry. You should always be asking yourself, okay, if there was an avalanche, how bad would it be? If there was something that I was missing and I just, didn't catch that unstable snow, what would be the consequences of an avalanche in this spot? And when the consequences start to get really high, then maybe it's time to take a step back and say, you know what? I don't want to put myself here. I am going to continue on into discussing triggers. We will take a break after triggers for another question section. So we've covered unstable snow. We've talked a little bit about avalanche terrain. Now we're going to talk about what actually kicks the avalanche off, what initiates the avalanche. And spoiler alert, the trigger is us. All of these happy people in the photo could potentially be triggers for their own avalanche or their group's avalanche. And I told you the statistic earlier that 90% of fatal avalanches are triggered by the victim or the victim's party. And this is a scary statistic. I don't want to downplay it. But what it does mean is that avalanches don't strike like a bolt of lightning out of the sky. They tend to be triggered by us. And thus, if we change our decision making, we can change whether or not we are impacted by avalanches. We can reduce the likelihood that we experience a fatal avalanche in the backcountry. So when we're thinking about triggers, we're going to return back to that avalanche danger scale, to the bottom line, and we're going to talk about a couple other tools. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but we're going to keep using those same tools. That way you can apply them when you're traveling in the backcountry. So let's look at where the human factor fits into a couple of these different danger scales. These danger scales will give us clues about how we should behave on any given day. Because at the end of the day, it's all good and fine to talk about unstable snow and avalanche terrain, but that doesn't really account for the fact that we're in the mix with all of our decision-making intricacies and behavioral quirks. So if we look at the definition for a considerable day, I've highlighted here this section: careful snowpack evaluation, cautious route finding, and conservative decision-making are essential. What that says, that gives me some behavior clues on how me and my group might want to make decisions on that day. I'm looking at words like careful, cautious, and conservative. You can compare that to the behavior clues that are in the low avalanche danger rating, where it says watch for unstable snow on isolated features. The vocabulary there is a lot looser. It's a lot less harsh and worried about some things going on in the snowpack. So maybe that might change how me and my group make decisions on that given day. Additionally, you can go back to the bottom line. The bottom line will give you simple actions and specific things that you might choose to do in the backcountry. Finally, I want to talk about choosing your partner wisely. Since we tend to be our own triggers, since groups tend to trigger avalanches on themselves, we want to put ourselves in the backcountry with people that we trust and with people that have a similar risk tolerance to us. What I mean by that is you don't want to be out in the backcountry and standing at the top of a slope and just then realize, oh no, I actually don't agree with this person at all. We want really different things out of today. And they brought the worst trail snacks and I'm hangry and they can't feed me. That's definitely the most important part of choosing your partner. But all jokes aside, I have many good friends that I love and respect, but choose not to travel in the backcountry with, just because our risk tolerances, maybe our travel speeds, what we want out of a day don't align. So being picky with who you travel in the backcountry is important, because you have to be sure that if it comes down to some difficult decision making, you are with somebody that you trust that will talk through the problem with you and help make decisions that you both can agree on and go home with. So going back to today's bottom line, again, this is what our forecasters think is going to happen in the west-south zone tomorrow. The kind of human component, the behavior component that I pulled out of the bottom line is give the snowpack time. So the forecasters are asking us to be patient, right? There's this healing process that's going on in the snowpack right now with the addition of a bunch of new snow. So the forecaster is reminding us that we as humans need to be patient, need to give it a little bit more time while the snowpack is repairing itself. Summarizing triggers, we can use the danger rating in the bottom line to identify some behavioral and decision-making tools that the forecasters are going to nudge us towards. Additionally, we want to be really cautious about who we go out in the backcountry with. And maybe we choose to go out with certain people and don't choose to go out with others based on lining up our goals and objectives for the day and our risk tolerance. I'm going to take a break here and ask for questions again. We've covered a lot of material.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, there's some really great conversations happening in the chat and the Q&A, and I will pass over some of these questions. John is wondering what a typical natural trigger might be, so a trigger not caused by humans or someone in your party.
Great question, right? So I've talked a lot about human triggers. You can, of course, have naturally triggered avalanches. There's a bunch of different ways that can happen. I think one of the easiest to understand ones would be a tree bomb. So a chunk of snow falling out of the tree, landing on the slope and releasing an avalanche. But you can also have a little bit less tangible natural triggers. You can have avalanches that are triggered just by the falling of snow or the movement of wind transport, and the addition of wind onto a snow slope. You can have avalanches that are naturally triggered by rain falling onto the snow and making it heavier or running through the snowpack. You can even have natural triggered avalanches that are triggered by animals running around on the slopes. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. This is a great question from Cece. She's wondering, how do you balance the risk of trees being lower avalanche risk, but vegetation also being a terrain trap?
That is a great question, Cece. So there's a couple different things going on in there. Dense tree cover can reduce the chances of an avalanche occurring in the terrain that you're traveling in. It can't completely remove the risk, right? Very large avalanches can knock down even old growth timber. So knowing what terrain you're traveling underneath, maybe you're traveling in dense trees, but if you were immediately underneath a big open bowl and that big open bowl avalanches, the trees might not keep you safe. Additionally, there is a big difference between traveling in dense trees as a way to reduce your exposure to avalanche hazard and traveling in a bowl above dense trees, where if you're caught in an avalanche, it could carry you into the trees. It's really hard to give a prescriptive decision-making tool because every situation is going to be completely different based on the terrain that you're in and your own risk tolerance and the risk for the day. But just thinking about those things and recognizing that there is a balance there, that you're having to say, like, trees are terrain traps, but trees can also be a safe zone, means that you're thinking about the right things.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's never a simple answer when it comes to managing avalanche terrain. Ray is wondering if you can describe the convexities.
Yeah, so convexities, we're going to go back to maybe middle school geometry here. You can think about the way that kind of a slope is shaped as either being like a C, a convexity, where it rolls over and there's a steep zone right in here, or a concavity, which would be like a U, where the slope rolls downhill but compresses as opposed to breaking. So convexities tend to be where we trigger avalanches, slopes that are shaped like a C, as opposed to concavities, slopes that are shaped like a U.
Wonderful, thanks, Robin. And we have a couple folks in the Q&A wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on the piece of the forecast you pulled out on the snowpack healing itself. What kind of factors would allow the snowpack to repair?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a whole branch of science. You can go get your PhD in snow science and crystal morphology and actually look physically at how the snowflakes change after they fall out of the sky and land on the snow, and all of the various weather processes and chemical processes that happen to the snow while it's sitting out there in the mountains. But in general, over time, avalanche problems will either get better or worse, depending on the type of weather that we have going on. And when the forecasters are talking about the snowpack healing itself, they're saying that there is, over time, the avalanche problem as it exists right now is going to get less bad, that the avalanche problem is going to reduce, that there's a rounding process going on, which is a technical snow jargon thing that talks about how snow changes over time in a way that increases stability.
Perfect, thank you. And our final question of this Q&A session, have a question wondering if an avalanche does slide, is the remaining snowpack generally safe to travel on? That's
a great question. Yes and no, like all good answers. Snow doesn't march back uphill once it's already slid. So an area that has avalanche no longer has that same avalanche problem in that exact spot at that exact time. You can have something called hang fire, which is there's still residual chunks of snow immediately above the avalanche path that could potentially release. So you do have to look out for those. But more generally speaking, if snow has avalanched, if a slope has avalanched, and the adjacent slope has not, that's a really good indicator that the snow right next door might also be unstable. So yes, in that particular spot, you might have removed an avalanche hazard for that given moment in time, but remembering what's next door is going to also be important.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, the snow is very dynamic as well as the landscape. So just keeping in mind that there's no real rule of thumb related to that question. Thank you all. We will move back into the presentation and then do a round of questions at the end.
Great. So we've covered a lot of information so far this evening, and I do want you all to walk away with some specific things that you can do, some pretty tangible tools that you can use and apply to when you're traveling in the backcountry. Some of the things that you can do to minimize your risk is you can always choose lower angle slopes. Additionally, you can avoid avalanche terrain, meaning you can avoid areas where avalanches would start, run, and stop. And finally, you can stay away during elevated danger. There are definitely days where it's really high avalanche danger, and I choose to not travel in the backcountry, or I choose to travel in flat areas very far away from start zones where I know that avalanches can't impact that area. So those are really simple, straightforward ways that if you have uncertainty, if you have doubt, or maybe if you're newer to traveling in the backcountry, you can always reduce your risk in those ways. I like to tell the story about a trip that I took to Alaska a couple years ago. I was on a ski trip with a friend, and we were really excited in a new area. We flew in and got dropped off by a bush plane, and it was snowing and snowing and snowing. And then all of a sudden, it switched to rain. And it rained and it rained and it rained and it rained, which is a huge red flag, right? Calling back to our unstable snow discussion. So we spent about 2 weeks in this really extended, unpleasant weather storm, just twiddling our thumbs, waiting for the avalanche forecast, waiting for the snow stability to change in a way that would let us actually get out and ski the things that we came to ski. And at the end of the day, it never did. We had to stay on really low angle terrain. The photo that I'm in this slide deck it's so low angle, I could barely get enough speed, right? I was kind of having to use my poles to roll downhill. But it was a fantastic trip. You can see from the photo, it was a beautiful area. It was a really cool place to be. And even though we didn't get to ski the lines that we set out to ski, we had a really good time. We learned a lot. And kind of the point of that story is regardless of how high the avalanche hazard is, there is always something that you can do outside. Maybe it's not that dream line that you've been looking at or that snowshoe tour you've always wanted to do, but there is always a way to be outside and recreate safely. It just involves avoiding avalanche terrain when you have high levels of uncertainty. I want to touch briefly on avalanche rescue. Obviously, we cannot cover avalanche rescue in an 1.5 hour online Zoom class. It is very hands-on. It does take time to practice, but I want to talk a little bit about the tools that you would use and resources for further education. In order to perform avalanche rescue, you need to carry these 3 pieces of gear in the backcountry. And I like to think of avalanche rescue kind of like putting on my seatbelt when I get in the car. I don't put on my seatbelt because I plan to get in an avalanche. I don't bring avalanche rescue gear because I plan I'm mixing up my metaphors a little bit. I don't put on my seatbelt because I plan to get in a car crash. I put it on because I want to be safe just in case. Additionally, I don't bring avalanche rescue gear because I plan to get in an avalanche. I bring it just in case, and I want to be sure that I know how to use it just in case. So the 3 pieces of avalanche gear that I bring with me every time I go into the backcountry are an avalanche beacon. That's this little computer device down here, and it has the ability to send out a radio frequency and also hone in on other people's radio frequencies. So that way you can locate your buried companion in the snow. I bring with me an avalanche probe. That's this tent pole looking device that locks in an extended position. So that way you can further locate your buried individual once you've narrowed down approximately where they are. And I bring with me a shovel, a metal shovel, not a plastic shovel, that I can use to excavate my buried friend from the avalanche debris. And everybody in the group needs to carry all 3 of these pieces of gear. The shovel does you no good if you only brought 1 shovel and it got buried with your friend, right? Everybody needs to have all 3. In order to practice avalanche rescue, I highly recommend that you all take an avalanche rescue course. These are one-day courses. They're really fun. They're great hands-on practice, and your instructor will teach you how you use each of these tools, and you'll get a bunch of repetitions through using those tools. Even if you've taken an avalanche rescue course or you feel pretty confident that you know how to use the gear, you still need to practice. Avalanche rescue is a perishable skill, so it's something that you need to be practicing every year, ideally a couple times a year, and you can make it fun. You know, at the end of your tour, at the end of your snowshoe trip, you can bury a backpack in the snow near your car and get a quick round of practice in with your friends. You know, make it fun, place a bet on it. Whoever gets the fastest time is going to buy the next round of beer or fizzy water or whatever your preferred carbonated beverage is. And finally, I want to talk about next steps, what you all can do now. We've covered a ton of information, and I know from your questions that you've asked that a lot of you have further questions about snow science and how to use avalanche terrain to your advantage and how to reduce your risk when you're in the backcountry. Well, first of all, I would encourage you all to read the avalanche forecast frequently. Rather than just reading it when you plan to go out, if you read it every day or every couple days, you will get used to the language that forecasters use, and you will get a better sense of how avalanche hazard rises and falls over time. It will become, it's like learning a foreign language. The more that you use it, the more comfortable you will get with it, and it will start to feel intuitive. Additionally, I would encourage you all to consider taking an avalanche rescue course or an AIARE Level 1 course. Avalanche rescue courses are one-day courses. AIARE courses are currently taught as 1 or 2 day afternoons of Zoom lecture after work, and then 2 days in the field, so usually over a weekend. They're wonderful courses. They cover the basics of how you identify avalanche terrain in the field, how you travel safely, how you use the forecast and actually apply it to planning your tour. And I would encourage you all to choose lower hazard days to go out and gain experience. So when you're new to the backcountry or when you're new to using the avalanche forecast, go out on a day where it's low hazard, or go out to an area that's really not avalanche terrain, where it's pretty low angle, and start practicing, start identifying, point at a slope and say, is that avalanche terrain or isn't it? How far would the avalanche go if it did slide? That practice on safe days will help you build up experience and confidence and move towards using that same tool on maybe a less safe day. And finally, get out and play in the mountains, right? Going back to kind of what I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, that's why we're all here. Avalanche safety is an applied practice, and in order to apply it, we have to go out and enjoy the mountains. NWAC provides a bunch of resources that you can use in your avalanche education journey. First of all, you can get the forecast I mentioned before at www.nwac.us, listed on the slide. Additionally, NWAC's Instagram page has been really built out over the last couple of years. As all the kids would be saying, it is lit these days. And the best part is that they have their forecasters post a bunch of videos and photos from popular touring areas. It'll give you information not only about the snow stability, but also the conditions, and give you, live photos of what the conditions actually are that day and what it might look like where you're planning to go the next day. NWAC runs a bunch of educational opportunities, including the Laying Tracks seminar, which are designed specifically for people who are newer to touring. They do a bunch of different topics, like using topo maps to plan a tour and applying the avalanche forecast given specific weather conditions. And one final plug, you can always consider becoming a member. This gives you access to a bunch of different members-only seminars and lectures. It's a really cool way to support your local community avalanche center. Finally, I want to say thank you all and open this up for a last round of questions this evening.
Thank you, everyone, Robin and Eudore, for doing such a wonderful job with this presentation this evening. I first just want to recognize that this is the first course NWAC has run with American Sign Language interpretation, so we really welcome all of your feedback and comments. I've put in the chat, you can send an email to awareness@nwac.us. I'll put that in the chat again, with any feedback, which we would really love to hear. And we'd love to create a space where folks in the deaf community can share resources on the best ways to find AIARE Level 1s with interpretation. So let's please send me those emails so that I can compile resources and hopefully share them out with the wider community. To get into some of the wonderful questions in our Q&A, let me take a look here. We have a couple folks wondering if everyone in the party must have those 3 pieces of avalanche rescue equipment.
Yeah, so everybody in the group should have each piece of gear. And the reason is if any one individual is buried, the rest of the group needs to be able to perform a rescue. And if you reduce the number of tools that you have in the group, you will reduce the efficiency with which you can unbury the person in the avalanche. I didn't mention this statistic, but most people who die in avalanches die from asphyxiation. They don't have enough air when they're buried in the snow. So there is a time limit on getting people out. Their survival rate really drops off after about 10 or 15 minutes. So everybody carrying a shovel, a beacon, and a probe reduces the amount of time it takes to excavate that buried person, get them to the surface, and increases everybody's survival time.
Awesome. Nicholas is wondering, his beacon is from 2012. Is it outdated for today's world?
Great question. I, with all beacon-specific questions, would refer you to your manufacturer's recommendation. So you can go online if you don't have the little booklet anymore and look up what they recommend. They do have a shelf life because even if you treat them well, just the process of pulling it in and out of your pocket and your car over time is going to bang up the antennae that are inside and will cause the signal to drift a little bit. You can often do firmware updates for the software, and that will extend its lifespan. You can also keep really good tabs on if the signal has wandered or not. You can figure that out by doing some range checks and some beacon checks of your own. But in general, I would say trying to replace your beacon every 5 years or so is ideal. I know they're an expensive piece of gear. So as long as you're taking really good care of it and it's a modern 3 antenna beacon and you're staying on top of the firmware, you can definitely nurse one along, but I would say look back at your manufacturer's recommendations and when in doubt, go with that.
Awesome, that's great advice, Robin. Still related to avalanche rescue equipment, Chris is wondering if you recommend an avalanche airbag, adding that to the list.
Great question. So avalanche airbags are kind of a newer piece of gear. And for those of you that might be unfamiliar, it's a backpack. And the backpack has a trigger on it that connects to an air canister. And when the air canister explodes, you get a big balloon of air popped up behind your head. And the idea behind an avalanche airbag is avalanches. If you all have ever shaken a bag of potato chips, the big potato chips end up at the top and the little potato chips end at the bottom. You want to be a big potato chip if you're in an avalanche. So anything that makes your surface area bigger makes it more likely that you end up at the top of the avalanche debris instead of at the bottom. Additionally, there might be some evidence that it kind of reduces the trauma to your head, neck, and back, but that's a little bit vaguer. The research on airbags reducing avalanche fatalities, though, is really good. It looks like they do have a big impact on people's ability to survive. That being said, they are expensive, and we do need to be cautious that we don't increase our risk-taking behavior to match an increased level of safety gear. When beacons were first created back in the 80s or 90s, people kind of assumed this is great. There's never going to be another avalanche fatality ever again. But what happened is people just started skiing more dangerous slopes because they had a beacon, and the number of fatalities stayed the same and actually increased. Same thing with seatbelts when they were first introduced to cars. It's called risk homeostasis. And it means that we have kind of a level of risk that we've decided we're going to tolerate. And when we're given safety tools, we just increase the amount of risk-taking behavior that we engage in. So I would encourage everybody who has the financial resources to get an airbag because the research is really good on their impact on our survival rate. I use one for work when I'm where I'm an avalanche control worker. But do keep in mind that we can't let our decision-making get out of control just because I have an avalanche airbag, so I can ski anything.
Awesome. We have some really great questions in the Q&A. And a handful of folks wondering, still related to avalanche rescue, if you are caught in an avalanche, are there some things you can do?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about avoiding getting in an avalanche, but it is worthwhile setting yourself up for success were you to be caught in an avalanche. Some things that you can do is expose one person at a time to the slope. You don't want to be in a situation where everybody is caught in the avalanche. You just want one person caught in the avalanche. If you are caught in that avalanche, either making noise if you're traveling with a hearing group or waving your arms, getting people's attention. So that way the group knows to watch you, so they can keep eyes on you as long as possible and identify the point that you were last seen. People describe swimming in avalanche debris or kind of like paddling to get to the top. The long and the short of it is fight like hell. Do whatever you can to kind of get to the back of the debris, get to the top of the debris. Don't lie there passively, but fight to be up high.
Wonderful. Robin, we have a really interesting question. If you have any knowledge on radios that would be deaf friendly. This is also, if folks in the audience have some information on this, please shoot me an email and I'll make sure to include some resources on the YouTube channel underneath this video. But I'm not sure, Robin, if you know anything about radios that might be helpful.
I unfortunately don't, and Eudore might have more information than I do, but I don't have information on hearing or deaf accessible radios.
Awesome. Yeah. If folks do have some knowledge on that, please feel free to send me an email, and I will compile some resources. There's some similar questions around beacons, and I will say that all beacons have a display screen that shows the numbers. They are often accompanied with sounds, but all beacons have a screen. Robin, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yep, all beacons have a screen and have both the numbers and arrows on that screen. Most beacons also do produce a sound. The sound is not critical to the search function. I don't teach using the sound as one of the tools in when I teach avalanche rescue. Some beacons have a headphone jack. If having a headphone connected to the beacon is useful to that individual for hearing the sound. But I would say that I would be interested to hear from folks who are deaf who use a beacon on strategies that they use, or if they've found that the sound is in any way relevant to their search process. But I do not teach the sound as being part of the beacon search.
Mm-hmm. Conrad's wondering what minimum probe length you would recommend.
I would go for 200 centimeters. Anything shorter than that is going to be hard to use in a Cascade snowpack, which tends to be fairly deep.
Perfect. And for folks who maybe aren't looking at the chat, I'm seeing some stuff that people are using an inReach device, which has texting capability rather than a radio. We have some more good questions. Sorry, y'all, I'm just kind of filtering through the Q&A here. Robin, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head. I don't, but I would be happy to look into it and send out an email to Jeff. He's wondering what percentage of avalanche fatalities in Washington come from trauma rather than asphyxiation.
I don't have the statistics for Washington. I do know that in North America, it's usually reported that 1/4 of avalanche fatalities are from trauma rather than asphyxiation. But that number is higher if you look just at Canada, where it's more like 50%.
Awesome. Okay. We have a question wondering about using Reco technology in your clothing or gear, if that can be an addition to avalanche rescue.
Great. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Reco is a passive technology, so it's basically a reflector strip in your clothing that's sewn into your clothing. It does not interfere with your beacon. In order to use Reco, you need to have a special Reco detector that pings out a signal and then receives it after it strikes off of that little reflector plate. Using a Reco is fairly finicky. It's a hard skill to get good at. It does take a very specific piece of equipment that most recreational users won't have access to. Search and rescue organizations will usually have one. And unfortunately, there's all kinds of things that interfere with Reco, like high water content snowpacks like we have in Washington, or certain types of minerals in the rock can interfere with Reco. So in general, I would say that it does not hurt anything. It certainly makes it more likely that you will be found at some point, but I mentioned that there's kind of a 10 to 15 minute window for most people buried in an avalanche to get recovered and have a higher chance of survival. And I wouldn't want my only safety net to be Reco.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. Frank is wondering if touring in an area that doesn't have observations, yet a neighboring forecast zone does, is it sensible to use those observations as guidelines?
Great question. So I didn't mention this earlier, but all of the forecast zones on NWAC's website will have information if you click on them, even if they're gray, even if they haven't been issued a danger rating. If you click on that forecast zone, it will have an in-depth discussion of the snowpack and talk about what's been going on there. The reason why it doesn't have a danger rating is because there are more limited observations there, so the forecaster doesn't feel that they have enough information to issue that danger rating, but you still will get information from clicking on that zone and reading the forecast. It can be hard to apply what's going on in another zone to what's going on in that zone. You have to have a pretty good sense of the weather and what's been happening in the weather over the entire season. So if you are really close to another zone and you know, like, hey, I'm really familiar with the weather patterns, and yeah, I'm only 10 miles into this zone and it's basically the same as that zone next door, it might be appropriate. But if you're completely on the other end of the state, it might be a lot harder to make those generalizations.
Yeah, that's really wonderful feedback. Another note related to the NWAC avalanche forecast. This was asked earlier, but all forecasts are issued at 6 p.m. the night before, but forecasters will update those forecasts over in the morning if there is some significant overnight change. So make sure you're not only selecting the correct forecast zone for where you're planning to travel, but also checking back in the morning to see if there's any more updated info related to the avalanche forecast or weather. We have a question about the difference between a skier and a snowboarder due to the straps and if you are caught in an avalanche.
Yeah, great question. So traditionally, people were advised if they were in an avalanche to jettison their poles and skis. The idea being that the skis kind of acted like anchors and weighed you down. Snowboarders obviously don't have that easy ability because their bindings aren't releasable. So if you are caught in an avalanche and you feel like, man, I'm not able to get out of this moment, if you can reach down and unlatch your bindings, that could be helpful. But in general, I would say prioritizing things like, trying to swim and stay on the top, or maybe using your ski poles, your trekking poles, if you're riding with those out, to kind of dig into the bed surface and self-arrest would probably be more useful than fumbling with your bindings. I believe there also are releasable snowboard bindings. I'm not super familiar with splitboard gear, but I believe I was told there have been some that have been designed to be releasable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. Jeff is wondering, this is related to the North American Public Avalanche Danger Scale, why extreme danger level and high danger level share the same icon?
Good question. not all areas use the 5 level. You know, some people combine high and extreme into one category. So they'll share the same icon and number, even if the color and verbiage might be a teeny bit different.
That's awesome. Thank you, Robin. We do have a time for a few more questions. Thank you all for sticking with us. There's still quite a few people on the webinar, and we appreciate you putting questions in the Q&A. So my apologies if we don't get to all of the questions this evening. You can always shoot an email to awareness@nwac.us, and I will try to follow up with you as promptly as possible. We have some people wondering about the Avalanche, if you would suggest using or purchasing one of those and having it in your arsenal of rescue equipment.
Awesome. Yeah, the Avalanche is kind of a older piece of gear at this point. You don't see as many new ones being manufactured. The idea is that since asphyxia is the primary cause of mortality in an avalanche, if you have a way to create an air pocket to get yourself more air, you might be more likely to survive longer until your partners have the chance to rescue you. An avalanche is basically a snorkel that you would ski with it, or ski or ride with it in your mouth, and it connects to a hose that runs to an air pocket in your backpack. Pretty simple technology, hard to break. The idea is that it just gets you more air. You do have to ski with it in your mouth in order for it to work, because the chances of you getting it into your mouth once you're actually caught in an avalanche are a little bit lower. And I've actually used one before, and it's very weird. It makes you sound like Darth Vader just when you're breathing, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. So I think it kind of fell out of fashion just due to the use discomfort and then the rise of the airbag. But I would say it 100% will not hurt your chances of surviving in an avalanche. And if you have access to one and like to use it, then it is just another tool in your arsenal to make you safer.
Great. Tonya is wondering if there are mixed avalanche courses, so related to AIARE Level 1 or a companion rescue class, that can be taken by both snowshoers and skiers.
Yeah, absolutely. Most AIARE courses, unless they're specified, are mixed use. So you will have people on any given course who are snowshoers, who are skiers, who are splitboarders, somebody who's snowshoeing and carrying their snowboard on their backpack, all kinds of different travel styles. So don't let that prevent you from signing up for a course. Every once in a while, there'll be one that's marketed towards a specific user group, but in general, they're all mixed use.
Yeah, that's great information, Robin. And in the chat, as well as on the NWAC website, I've posted the link to where you can find AIARE courses by local providers. You can take a look at those websites as well as do some Google searching on your own. And if anyone in the community does know of a ASL awareness class, I have yet to find one in my Google searches, but if there are some resources out there, please send them my way, as I know there is demand and there's really a lack for that resource in the avalanche industry right now. Okay, we have time for a few more questions. We had a question around snowmobiles, Robin. How do snowmobiles act as a trigger, and are there any resources similar to wanting to remove your skis and poles should you hop off your snowmobile in the case of an avalanche?
Great question. So when I was talking about travel specific avalanche courses, I should have mentioned before that there actually are a growing number of sled specific AIARE 1 courses, mainly because you travel different, right? Like you travel in a really different way than snowshoers, skiers, splitboarders, etc. So keep that in mind as a resource. You could, if you enjoy sledding, you should look for an AIARE level 1 specifically for sledders. That way it actually applies to how you travel. But in general, sleds act as a trigger in the exact same way that a skier or snowboarder does, right? They're an impact on the slope. They cause that initiation and release of an avalanche. But because they are so much bigger, they have the potential to trigger much deeper in the snowpack than skiers do. So you can continue to trigger avalanche problems that have long been buried and skiers can't trigger anymore. Additionally, because you can travel so much faster, you have the potential to cover a lot more terrain and thus expose yourself to more avalanche terrain just by, exponentially being out longer and out further in the backcountry. So sledders definitely are not immune to avalanche risk. And I think there's a lot of growing awareness in the sled community that having avalanche education, traveling with the correct gear is super important. The biggest thing that I know about kind of like being caught in an avalanche from a sledder's perspective is you definitely want your avalanche gear on your person, not on your sled. It does you no good to get buried in an avalanche if your beacon was, tucked in a backpack that was attached to the sled as opposed to like actually on your body. So you do want to wear your avalanche beacon. You want to have your shovel and probe in a backpack that's strapped onto your body. And then most people will get pulled off of their sled in the avalanche. It would be hard to stay on the sled in the event of a large avalanche. So you probably will come off it no matter what.
Thanks, Robin. Jeff has a great question that I am happy to field. He's wondering, regardless of additional training, if there are specific classes to route finding. And I will pitch that NWAC actually has a course on using mapping tools and applying that to wintertime travel. That's coming up this Thursday, the 18th at 7 p.m. And some folks from CalTopo will be presenting on how to use the CalTopo app, how to utilize slope angle shading for better route finding through backcountry terrain. So I will put that link to the workshop in the chat. It is free for anyone who is an NWAC member, or $15 if you want to attend. So that's a great resource for some continuing education. And our final question of the evening, Heidi is wondering why you recommend a metal shovel over a plastic one.
Just for durability, if you have ever either walked through avalanche debris or even just kind of like walked through the snow that plows have churned up right next to the side of the road, you'll probably notice it ends up really chunky, heavy, and frozen together. When I mentioned before that avalanche debris sets up like concrete, right? What's going on is the snow, as it's running downhill, there's a small amount of friction that's generated that causes the snow to melt a teeny bit and then refreeze back together into ice blocks, basically. So if you're having to excavate somebody from avalanche terrain, there's a possibility that you're having to really hack and chop and cut your way through avalanche debris. So a flimsier plastic shovel won't be able to do that as efficiently. It's a little bit of a sad note, but there have been people recovered recently from large avalanches in Utah that they had to actually use power tools to recover the bodies.
Well, on that cheery note, I do want to really thank Eudore and Robin for participating this evening. We know that the deaf community needs some more resources in the avalanche industry, and we're really excited to offer this very first class. Like I said, any comments or feedback are really welcome. So thank you for everyone who joined us this evening, and we hope to include more of these accessible resources in the future coming from the Northwest Avalanche Center. Thank you all, and a reminder, this will be posted on the NWAC YouTube channel in the coming weeks, and you can always reach out to awareness@nwac.us with any questions. don't know if Robin or Eudore, you want to say anything to close off the session, but feel free.
Thanks for everybody for showing up tonight and asking the great questions. And thanks to Eudore for interpreting and Renee for hosting.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Eudore. Everyone in the chat is really appreciative and think you did an awesome job. Perfect.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks all. Have a wonderful evening.